Thank you for downloading this podcast on 702.co.za or capetalk.co.za.
Know your rights. Use them responsibly. Lead SA.
You're listening to Really Clappy.
Youth interaction with political culture. That's what we're going to talk about. Geez, it seems a lot of our conversations today are based on surveys and barometers. Why not? They do deal with interesting issues. Even if you don't entirely buy the outcome or the numbers, that's fine. But the issue itself, the topic, the 2012 Reconciliation Barometer report was released yesterday, and I found it interesting. It focuses on youth attitudes and shows some very interesting insights on attitudes of the born-free generation towards political culture. And that's whom I want to address. You know, often we have conversations about the youth. We have opinions about drugs and relationships and sex and teen pregnancies and young people must vote this way. But what do they say? What do they say? Let's not have conversations about them. Let them have a conversation with us. Now, for decades within the liberation struggle, young activists in diverse corners of the country defied apartheid. They challenged complacent elders. They fled their homes into exile and were shot down in the streets. So we have a history in this country, not just in this country, but other parts of the world, of young people turning the course of history. Look at the spring, the Arab Spring, the uprisings, how they started, how pivotal was the youth in changing things around. Now, the way we think and speak about the youth in South Africa today is far removed from the high regard we have for the youth of the past. It's true. What about today's youth? What are they doing? Why are they not doing it if they're not doing it? All right? Are they a lost generation? Do they not have political awareness? However, according to the results of the 2012 Reconciliation Barometer, young South Africans don't see themselves that way. They don't see themselves the way we see them, as these complacent people who have no leadership and no activism. Findings from the report indicate that young South Africans regard themselves as confident, active, and creative. They are optimistic about the future despite being skeptical on many fronts. We are going to find out more about this Reconciliation Barometer. Stay with us. Jan Hofmeyer is the program head for policy and analysis at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, and they released the 2012 Reconciliation Barometer. Good morning to you, Jan. Welcome.
Good morning, Reedy.
Thank you so very much. Obviously, in fact, let's start here. Tell us about the Reconciliation Barometer. What is it that it aims to measure? What picture does it paint about our country?
The Reconciliation Barometer is a public opinion survey that the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation has been conducting since 2003 already. So we've got sort of a long sort of database of South African public attitudes and focusing specifically on political change, economic change, how that impacts on South Africa's public opinion, but also look specifically on how it impacts on relations between South Africans given our history. Mm-hmm. Now, last year we thought we'll specifically want to focus on the issue of youth. And for many reasons. I think one of them has been, also the survey or the 2011 census results, which indicated that about 2/3 of South Africans are younger than 35, which means it's a very influential part of our demographic. One also saw that the National Development Plan also placed great emphasis on the issue of youth, young people, unemployment, and things related to the well-being of young South Africans. And they went as far as to say that with this large young demography that we have, it can either be a huge demographic dividend for us, because what one then sees is that you have a very low dependency ratio where you have a large number of working-age South Africans able to contribute to the economy, and a lower sort of amount of South Africans dependent, in other words, too old to work or too young to work. So it's very important that we study this demographic. Now, if one looks basically sort of at our developmental statistics in South Africa, and you look specifically at those relating to young people, I think there's a lot to stem us negative, about their future. And I think these things are real if one looks at the state of public education, the state of child poverty, and etc. But what we found surprising is that a very large proportion of young South Africans, almost 48%, when we asked them, how do you see your economic well-being in the next 2 years, about 48% indicated that they felt that it will be improving.
Mm-hmm. All right, Jan, I want to link this with global events. And I think that if anyone ever thought that young people are complacent, that young people do not engage with the political, with the socio-political milieu or culture of that time, then the events, certainly in the Arab world, have shown the opposite. Young people there change the course of history. What can we learn from that experience? One could also argue that South Africa has had that young people-led revolution in 1976, but even now in the 21st century, certainly the events in that part of the world tell us that there is a wide scope for young people to be active.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're correct. We can definitely look at what has happened in North Africa with the so-called Arab Spring. And, if one looks at the developmental circumstances in North Africa, in many of these countries, poverty levels are lower than in South Africa. Inequality is lower as well. But I think what one has seen in North Africa was that sort of in the wake also of the global recession, a lot of young people in these countries experience material anxiety, fears of what am I going to do in terms of employment, where am I going to earn a wage, etc. What distinguished them from a country like South Africa, for example, is that they were sort of operating in political systems that were oppressive, authoritarian, and dictatorial. And they did not have any sort of vent in terms of which they could voice and articulate their concerns. In South Africa, on the other hand, we have a democratic system where young people can vent their dissatisfaction with certain things. But what we saw in the survey, and I think this is something that authorities also have to pay attention to, is that almost half of young people indicated that they feel that there is really no way to make a civil servant listen to their concerns if they feel that they have a genuine issue that has to be addressed.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk then about confidence in institutions, which is one of your results there. You're saying the Reconciliation Barometer Survey hypothesizes that reconciliation is more likely to occur in South Africa if citizens view public institutions, political leaders, and the work of government as legitimate, accountable, and responsible. I'd like you to speak to that for just a moment. But the issue of reconciliation and young people, I mean, we're talking about the Born Frees. It could be easily argued that they have nothing to reconcile, but they do, because they are witnessing the effects of political system that has failed. If they're failing to find jobs today, there's a direct link between that and the decisions that have been made in the past.
Yeah, I think one has to see reconciliation also in very broad terms, and one of those indicators that we use is political culture, and one of the things that we look at specifically is trust in institutions. And that hypothesis is basically that if all South Africans view public institutions as legitimate institutions to rule on the affairs of the country, the society will be less polarized because people accept the institutions and their judgments and their decisions on specific issues. Now, what we've seen in South Africa is still we have quite high positive evaluations of public institutions. The lowest, or the institution with the lowest positive evaluation is local government, which is just under 50% positive evaluation. But I think what is something that we have to keep a check on is that since about 2006, we've seen sort of a steady decline in the positive evaluations that public institutions in general have received. And during that year, what one saw in that year, and following on that, was sort of political tussles where one saw Polokwane, specifically how some of the politics spilled into public institutions as well. And then we saw sort of quite a significant dip and sort of a slow increase again in positive evaluations, but we've never seen the same confidence levels in public institutions again since those that we saw in around 2006.
So how do young people feel about the political culture? How do they feel about the trajectory of the country?
Yes, I mean, that to us is a very interesting question, sort of given sort of the fact that 2/3 of our population is younger than 35. And if you think last year was 2012, where the group of young people who were born in 1994 turned 18, in other words, turned voting age. And this will sort of add, I think, a very different dynamic in our politics in years to come, because they do not have sort of a direct sort of experience of that sort of past prior 1994. Their attitudes are also largely shaped by material considerations, whereas there has been a generation of South Africans that sort of evaluated the country pre and post 1994. We will have a new generation of South Africans that might live with the consequences of pre-1994, but their real political attitudes are shaped in the post-1994 era, and these concerns are largely material concerns.
Yes.
How do I get ahead in life?
I wonder, Jan, I mean, because we have such a sad history of blood, racism, institutionalized marginalization of one by the other. I wonder what informs young people today, what informs their political outlook. I understand that they've got their own material concerns, but do their parents, their family tradition, the experiences of their ancestors, for lack of a better word, also influence how they regard South Africa's political landscape?
Yeah. That I think is not an easy question to answer, because we, in this binary that we usually tend to see young people either as a ticking time bomb or the dividend for the future, we tend to generalize, and we tend to see young people as homogenous. I can sort of reflect sort of quickly on a series of focus groups that we've done in 2011, where we asked these questions to young South Africans, and they generally see themselves sort of as people with potential, as being creative, and also being with agency. Now, I think an older generation might sort of dismiss that as youthful naivety, but I think this is an intangible asset that we have in South Africa that one also needs to nurture and mobilize over time. Now, what we've seen specifically, sort of in the cohort of young South Africans who find themselves in tertiary institutions and so on, those concerns are largely sort of employment related.
Yes.
Where and how am I going to make a living for myself in the future? As far as their political orientation is concerned, we've seen that about 58% of young South Africans also said that they are not stuck on voting for one specific party, and that they're also willing to shift their political loyalty depending on which party would be able to offer them a view and a perspective of the future. But just adding to that, I think we also have to remember that many young people also don't only see themselves as political animals that have to express themselves politically through a political party. We've seen in the last few years a proliferation of young sort of youthful movements like Equal Education or Section 27 and the TAC that is being largely driven by young South Africans who are actually very actively engaged in politics, but not necessarily along party political lines.
Jan, I've absolutely loved chatting to you, and thank you so much for sharing your insights into this. We're going to continue the conversation with young people. We'd love to hear from some of them. But just very quickly, what do we do then with this information in terms of planning the direction of our country?
I think what is very critical is to make sure that young people feel that they are heard, that they become part of the national discourse. And I mean, this may sound very sort of idealistic, but what we have seen in North Africa has been sort of young people with energy, but being very disillusioned with their circumstances, and they've taken to the streets. I think what we do have to avoid is being in a democracy where we have the institutions at our disposal, but not allowing young South Africans to participate in them.
Lovely. Jan, thank you very much for chatting to us.
You're most welcome, Rita.
Jan Hofmeyer, Program Head, Policy and Analysis at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. We are going to hear from COPE and the DA youth, just to talk about how they view young people, how they appeal to young people. Do they think they appeal to young people? And you may ask, why are we excluding the ANC Youth League? Enough said. But our lines are open for you, 021-446-0567, 011-883-0702. Talk to me in the same way that you spoke to me about police and not reporting the case. Not opening criminal cases when you need to, when crime has been committed. If you're young and you're living in South Africa, and what's youth age is what? We're not talking about the ANC Youth League youth. Yuveka, talk to me. You and I are basically, I think we are around the same age. I think.
I'm a little older. That's okay.
But a little, with the same generation.
Yes.
But I don't think do we qualify as young people? I'm 35 in 2 months. I don't think we qualify.
No,
I don't think we do.
No, we don't. We're grown-ups.
Yeah, we're grown-up. We have careers by now. You have a family. I have
We're
a
not
family.
youth. We're not youthful.
We're definitely not youthful, although we look it.
Yeah, we do look it, but if you want to get technical about it, we're not youth. We're not youth.
Well, according to my producer who knows everything, Nolwazi knows everything. She says you're youth until you're 35. So basically, I turned 35 in May. So will I be youth until I turn 36? I don't want to be youth.
I'm talking not youth.
I'm not youth. I want to talk to young people. Those of you who are making decisions, you have to make a decision about where you want to live, where you want to study, what's going to happen to your future. We're entering the political, election year next year. You must make decisions. You're looking at your South Africa and you're going, what the hell is going on? Or you're going, yes, this is what I want. There are opportunities. What did Trevor Manuel say in the National Planning Commission said that the youth has become our single greatest risk to social stability. Right? But certainly our youth can be our greatest potential for social stability and economic growth. Do you see yourself as that potential? Do you think you're being ignored? Do you think when you talk to your friends, does South Africa have an idea of what you want, of what it's like to be a young person, of what your struggle is? I used to get cross when I was young, when people used to make it look as if my generation doesn't have struggles of its own just because we were not there in 1976. That was a different struggle, and we're grateful for the opportunities and the doors that it opened. But certainly we had our own struggle: education, fighting inequality, HIV and AIDS, crime. So what's your struggle? 021-446-0567, 011-883-0702. Sylvester in Fourways, talk to me.
Hey, how you guys?
Fine, thank you.
It's quite astonishing because, they say that 2/3 of South Africa is definitely under the age of 35. And in fact, it really also links to the fact that 60% of Africa is all under the age of 30. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing because it's an important demographic. And for us, and for people to look at young people like myself as a liability is really, really quite short-sighted. And because it's a huge opportunity. I've just recently come back from the World Economic Forum, where I was invited as one of the global shapers representing young people.
Oh, yes, I read about that. Mm-hmm.
And the important part here is to realize that even the World Economic Forum realizes the importance of engaging with young people around discussions that really shape the government and the private sector as a whole. And why will they do that? Because they understand that the view and the opinion of young people is really incredibly important, because it's an energy that is waiting to bloom. And while people think that it's going to be a time bomb, I really do believe that there's a huge opportunity of it incredibly driving the future of our country going forward.
Wonderful. And congratulations, Sylvester. I'm very proud of what you've achieved. Remembering that we studied at Rao together. UJ now called, and I've just watched you soar and making us all proud. Well done.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sylvester recently returned from Davos at the World Economic Forum. So there we have it. That's a challenge for those who are making policy, those who like to talk about the youth. Do we have our finger on the pulse? Do we have our ideas? Are they aligned with the future that young people envisage for themselves? Here's somebody I haven't heard from in a long time. Zizi Godwa, good morning.
Good morning, my sister. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Always good to hear from you.
Lovely.
I must say it's one of those subjects I think in the past we have always had surveys that talk bad about young people, discouraging them, this apathy and so on. I've always, I'm a believer that we can't compare young people post-94 and pre-1994. Post-94, it had opportunities. Young people, you find them in arts, in culture, in economic spheres and so on, things that were never there before. So if you measure their activism, you can't measure them on the basis of how young people participated pre-1994, because then their only agenda was to defeat the system at that time. Now the system is that they live in a new democratic dispensation. There's opportunities almost everywhere. You must look at their participation in church, in sport, in arts, in culture, engineers, in schools. You will find that in fact they've got high levels of participation. Even if you use elections, my sister, as a benchmark in terms of their participation, you will see that especially 2004, 2009, a high turnout of young people. And in spite of the fact that even at that time, there were surveys to say there's youth apathy. There's nothing like that. Even the concept of born free, I don't agree with it. I don't know what are the theoretical bases of a born free. Because young people are not born free in South Africa. That's why we still talk about an incomplete liberation, because we have not yet emancipated people economically. Therefore, they are born in conditions of struggle, socially, economically. Therefore, they are not free.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's what I was saying earlier, Zizi, that there may be political freedom, meaning you and I can live wherever we want, we can marry whoever we want, we're not going to be arrested for expressing our views, but we mustn't romanticize it. That doesn't mean that life is necessarily easy for young people, or that young people don't care about the future of their country. They do, and that is often informed by their reality.
Absolutely, my dear. I can't agree more with your sentiment.
Thank you very much for calling, Zizi. Thanks
You're
indeed.
Welcome.
That's Zizi Kodwa. The SMSs are coming in, lots of them coming in, and we're talking to young people this morning. Or even if you're not young, I mean, I'm sorry if I sounded like I'm excluding those who are above 35. No, I wasn't. I was just encouraging young people, the youth, to take advantage of this, especially those who are making decisions at the moment. You know, if you are making decisions about your future, your education, what are your hopes? What are your aspirations? Where do you think you're going to go? What would you like to see being done differently? Political leadership, captains of industry. There's leadership in all sectors of our society, not just the ANC, the DA, COPE, and the political parties. Religious leadership, community leadership. What would you like to see? Nyeleti in Parktown, hi.
Hi, how are you? Really?
Fine, thanks.
Good, thanks. I was actually saying that, you know what, opportunities are there, but it's actually harder for us to actually break into the industries based on the corruption that there is, because you need to know somebody in higher places for you to actually make it through. You can actually go in and you could have all the required skills and whatnot, but if you don't have the financial means or know somebody, then it's very hard for us to actually break through.
Mm-hmm,
That's how I see it. Because back then they used to struggle. They would struggle, but it was a group of people that did it. But right now it's an individual struggle, because if I go as an individual into a specific, like into the government, and I try and actually sort of come up with ideas or actually sell ideas, I need to know somebody for them to actually buy it, or I need to actually pay for my idea for them to consider it. So I think it's harder right now than it was back then.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right. Thank you very much. That's Nyeleti in Parktown. All right. We're taking your calls 021-446-0567, 011-883-0702. We also thought it would be important to speak to various political formations. We'll speak to the DA, Deputy Federal Chairperson, and Youth Federal Leader for the Democratic Alliance, Councillor Makashule Gana. We'll also hear from the President of COPE, the COPE Youth Movement. And as I said, the ANC Youth League has been disbanded. But if you still consider yourself, the leadership has been disbanded, but I think the league on its own, I mean, I'm not a politician, I don't know how it works, but I think if you've got membership of the ANC Youth League, does not mean that you're no longer a member of the ANC Youth League. You simply don't have leadership at the top. So you're more than welcome. I know many of you are listening, you SMSing, you tweeting. We just didn't know who to invite. There was just no one to invite representing the ANC Youth League. But as a caller, you certainly can come through, and I want to hear from you. 021-446-0567, 011-883-0702. Councillor Makashule Gana, DA's Federal Youth Leader and Deputy Federal Chairperson. We've heard from young people. They continue to phone us, to SMS us, saying, hear from us. This is our potential. These are our fears. As the Democratic Alliance, where do you stand as far as development of young people in all sectors is concerned?
Morning, Reddy, and morning to your listeners. I think it's important what young people are saying insofar as them not being heard, especially by political leaders. I think even the report or the survey that was released in the last few months points to that. I think the problem or the issue started with when politicians start behaving or believing that they are too important for the citizens. And that's something that personally motivated me to be involved in politics, to say that I need not be behaving the same way that the current leaders or current rulers behave, because these challenges that we face as young people need to be sorted out by young people who actually see in themselves leaders of tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. But sometimes the youth complains that they are targeted only when political parties want votes. In terms of content, policy policy direction, how seriously does the DA take the voice of the youth?
I mean, we take the youth very seriously. I mean, South Africa is one of the youngest countries in terms of age, the number of young people in the country. That's something that should be a competitive advantage for the country. But at this moment, most of our young people are not contributing to the growth of the country economic. So that's something that we have placed as a DA at the center of all our policy proposals. Even our the way we implement policies in the province that we govern and municipalities that we govern, we put the youth development at the center of our program.
In your view, then, as the Democratic Alliance, what do you think are the biggest challenges facing young people?
The biggest one is obviously unemployment, creating space. I mean, the young people at the moment, they are closed outside. You know, very few of them are actually contributing positively to the growth of our economy, and that's something that, as a DA, we believe needs to be at the center, and we're trying very hard wherever we are given the responsibility to govern, to deliver those services to young people.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. That's Councillor Makashule Gana, DA's Federal Youth Leader and Deputy Federal Chairperson of the Democratic Alliance. And now we go to Nqaba Banga, who's the President of COPE, and COPE is a COPE Youth Movement. And Nqaba, the same questions to you, really. Do you think that political formations in South Africa, particularly those made up of young people, are more concerned with politics or the future of the youth that they claim to represent?
Thank you, Reddy. Reddy, our view as the Congress of the People, really, after looking into the report on South African Reconciliation Barometer Survey, have revealed a number of things that we believe in. Amongst others, is that it has revealed the fact that it is very important that our people participate in the whole process of a democratic South Africa. Because our people only think that it is only through voting, and after that, you cannot do anything about it. But they don't focus more on monetary government institution, the leadership, in meeting the things that government promised. That's the major challenge that in our country we're confronted with. We do not really have an active youth in South Africa that participate on the day-to-day activities and running of government institutions.
But how is there a platform for them? How can they do that? And I mean, I don't agree with you, because I often get invited to a lot of forums by South African young professionals, and some of them are not even professionals. They're unemployed. They're community leaders. Is it that you as politicians are not in touch with what young people are doing on the ground?
No. What I'm saying, Reddy, is that the most important critical thing that we must consider is that we go and vote for government, but we don't make government accountable to the programs in which the government has promised. We don't keep government accountable that if you said you promise free education for all, that government will give free education. If you promise jobs, you because voting is a contract for 5 years. If you promise me a house in a period of 5 years, if we don't implement that program or give me that house, I'm supposed to hold you responsible by decision making.
So you think the youth is not doing enough of that?
We don't take seriously our power to vote in South Africa. and we don't utilize that power for decision making and changing some of the decisions we make. I was in Alexandra the other time in the election campaign. They were rejecting us all in terms of campaigning. I said to them, the problem is that if you do not vote or you do not take government responsible in the promises they make and continue to vote for those who make promises and don't implement them, you are making a contract in saying, I want to live without a house for the next 5 years. Because voting, it's all about that. Now, that's one problem that we're confronted with already. The second problem we are confronted with in South Africa is heroism. Heroism and traditional politics of keeping those who are in power. The youth is also guilty of that. Say, I cannot change my decisions on the party that I choose on the basis that I believe that this party liberated me.
Okay.
And that has kept our country having these mediocre politicians that we have.
All right. Okay, Ngaba, we'll leave it there. Ngaba Banga, president of the COPE Youth Movement. So let's talk about it. Youth, an asset or a liability? I think there's potential there that we are missing, and young people can be our greatest resource. Let's go to Thabo in Midrand. Hi.
Hi, Reddy. Really, I'm very tired of talk shops and the many things that are spoken about by politicians and the legislation here and there. Some of the things that some of us have actually embarked on is to create programs through our own NGOs that are supposed to enable employment creation. Look, if you don't have money to create employment, rather make the employment environment fluid enough for people to be ambitious or be driven to move from their current state to the next level whereby they can better their lives. I'll give you an example. If you, for instance, have a receptionist who's been a receptionist for 5 years, that is a very sad state of affairs, because you'd ideally like that person to have been groomed for the next stage where there could be either training for being a bookkeeper or so on, and make room for new entrances.
Okay, so not enough progress, not enough platform for a young person to move from point A even to point D. All right, let's go to Kabelo in Centurion. Hi.
Hi. Really, the problem is access to equal opportunities. A person who has a master's is graded still in this country according to the race. That's one thing, as well as actually getting into the business environment. If you, for example, are a black man studying a business in this country, getting access, sales, getting jobs is very difficult as an entrepreneur. And now the problem that we're facing is, if this prolongs, you're getting all of these guys from Asia, India, China, who have already better equipped or more refined techniques. So you now have to compete with that. You've basically lost, say, 16 years where you could actually build your skills up, your experience. So this is a problem that we're facing. We have to now compete at an international scale, but we're not given that equal opportunity.
Okay, all right, short and sweet, and I think you're making a lot of sense, Kabelo. Gaugelo in Midrand. Hi.
Really, KG and really can't leave it to politicians. We definitely need to be doing something, in our own communities. Somehow we actually, by God's grace, we've made it. So now, why can't we do something in our own communities, basically, in actually giving other young people a hand up?
And how do we do that? We go back to our communities, we go back to those communities that raised us and share our skills, our expertise?
Definitely that way. We have to also create that environment that says, I see potential in you. And because I know I've actually gone through this, I can share with you my experience in trying to develop you and share the skills.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you very much, Gaugelo in Midrand. Thanks indeed for the call. Okay, there are lots of SMSs that have come through, a lot of tweets as well. And SMS says if the rural youth continue to be ignored educationally, we will be a time bomb. Good morning, Reedy. I'm a youth. Is this the one, Nolwazi? I'm a youth, age 20. I think the youth in South Africa is divided economically. One can maybe even go further and say even at social level, the minority of the youth that grow up in the middle high class families have a future to look forward to, but the majority in townships don't have qualifications, and it's in these areas that we have high levels of drug abuse, youth crime, and so on. That's where we need to focus in enriching them. Thanks indeed for a great SMS.